Welcome to the UAC podcast this week. Joseph Johnson here, as always, with two of our authors from Fringe Methodologies in High Performance and Health, Jed Smith and Dr. Peter Smolinoff. Thanks, guys, for joining me again here. I think it's our fifth edition. Appreciate you guys taking the time out during this COVID lockdown to talk with me again about the book. So, as we're going through the book, you guys did a chapter on the physical training, where, what are the fringe ideas there, newer concepts maybe. And before we dive into those, we want to look at what the principles that all of those are based upon, or whatever the underlying foundation is, which is long-term athletic development. This terminology gets used a bit in the United States, but it really has never been modeled in any serious way. So we really don't know what that actually means in a practical sense, I don't think. But the Soviets probably were the first model for this. They had developed schools for youngsters, depending on the sport that the athlete might want to participate in. They also talked about, the development of even children, how their physical education should be conducted to get them ready to train at the appropriate time. And also, the training for the coaches and teachers that were involved in this, was fairly high level. It wasn't just anyone. You couldn't coach a kid just because you had played the sport. You had to undergo some training. Can you guys talk about this, like, the beginning, like the basis upon which the fringe methodologies would be developed?
Yeah, Joseph, I'll touch a little bit on that first. Initially, LTAD models. That's that's the big buzz acronym in strength and conditioning, long-term athletic development, and it's just because we're now talking about it doesn't mean it didn't exist really in the United States. And there's evidence of we can go back in early 19th century textbooks in the United States on dumbbell training and so forth that was being done for in schools. Early 20th century. In fact, I look at where I'm at, the University of Northern Iowa. I actually went and did research in our library and found out our whole physical education department, which I'm in. It initially started because kids were getting injured strength training in schools in Iowa. And this was 1887. The very first instructor here at our university was put in place to try to help when it came to free weight training in schools within the state, to make it safer and put in a systemized approach with starting out with gymnastics training, body weight training, and then moving forth into dumbbell and free weight training. So really we can go back just in the state of Iowa here in the United States at our university and see that we were doing long-term athletic development models as far back as 1887 right here in Iowa. And that's interesting because, here I'm a modern strength and conditioning coach and professional here. And we just think that, oh yeah, this is all new. But this stuff has been around a while and people have been trying to systemize. Now things have evolved and, what we call, like Peter said in the last podcast, just because, certain areas of the world call it fringe methodologies doesn't necessarily meaning it's fringe in another area. For example, kettlebells that, became so big in the fitness industry over the last 15, 20 years. Kettlebells have been around a long time. In fact, they go way back into history, and obviously the Russian culture used kettlebells quite a bit. And I remember when they came over here in the United States, as far as this is fringe, and everybody was needed to learn how to train with them properly. It really wasn't fringe, and it's just reinvented. or comes back out again. But we'll talk a little bit about long-term athletic development. I know Peter probably has some opening comments as well on maybe the ideas, where it came from in history.
Yeah, Peter, if you would, you've got that background there, and you actually went through the program or the system yourself in the former Soviet Union. What was the history there, and what was that like going through that?
It's called now American Development Model. Every national governing body under United States Olympic Committee umbrella is now expected to publish these guidelines on their website, and it's a summary of how much you should be training, how many competitions you should be going to, limitations that you should be aware of that are age specific. This came from Canada, where again every sport under Sport Canada published long-term athlete development guidelines. That was done by István Balay from Hungary, a sports scientist who brought this concept to North America from Eastern Europe. It was summarized for each sport in Canada, then it spread into many English-speaking countries: Australia, United Kingdom, South Africa, United States. Before the most advanced, in this sense, Eastern European countries started this. These are countries of Austria, Hungary, Czech Republic, Germany, then Russia. But again, there was nothing new about this even 100 years ago. The concept that is probably as even more developed than in many sports in the West now existed in South Korea, Japan, and China hundreds of years ago. And if you look at the best, for example, Taekwondo clubs in North America, this is what they provide. They provide more than 10 belts before you get to black belt, and then you get 7 dans in black belt. This is long-term, seamless, stressless progression of long-term athlete development that includes not just competition results. This is what we're suffering from in the West. We measure our results by our success in competition. Okay, but to pass through a very good system of Taekwondo clubs, before you get to competition, before you get to sparring and combat, for each belt you need to pass your fitness test. Okay, shuttle runs, push-ups, sit-ups, flexibility, strength, and endurance and coordination. Then you pass a knowledge test, and only then you pass a Pumsei test, which is a coordination. In karate, it's called kato, which is a set of movements. And only then you do your sparring or your real competition with the partner. So in summary, that's where still best practice exists, and for most sports, it's still a fringe. Still, even in our traditional Western wrestling, we wrestle at competitions, and very often participants are not required to reach a very high level of strength, endurance, flexibility, and coordination, and that is best practice. So when we're talking about Soviet Union and in Eastern Europe, they took these ancient practices of long-term requirements for participants, so that every year you have very specific objectives for progression. and they created a system of fitness tests and system of sport-specific requirements through which you progress. So there are 11 stages, age-specific stages in fitness tests. Start from 6 years old, going through 11 age categories, and the last category is 70 plus. And that is integrated with a system of sport-specific requirements that start with 3 ranks that require specific minutes, not only specific places in competitions, but a number of seconds you run or swim specific distance. Okay, those 3 junior ranks, 3 senior ranks, and then 4 master ranks. So you go through at least 10 stages of development. And if you do it together with the fitness test, it means that every year you have a very specific, achievable, very clear, healthy guidelines for development. You know how many push-ups you need to be able to do, how many pull-ups you need to be able to do, sit-ups, how fast you must be walking or running 1 mile or so, 3 miles or so, and what you need to know in terms of your knowledge of hygiene and some basic periodization, and then so you every year you're very clear as a child, as a kid, as a child, as a teenager, on what to achieve this year in order to progress from your first steps in fitness and in every sport to the highest desirable level of performance.
And Joseph, that's what's very unique about our book is for the first time, and this was not an easy task, as you know, trying to get those tables, those charts into our book. That was probably the most difficult part of our book. But Peter was able to get copies and translate all of those standards of long-term athletic development for testing that are used in Russia, and all the way up to 70-year-olds. So this is not, it doesn't end when you're done being an athlete, which is very, very unique about this culture. We don't do, now this is fringe in the United States, for sure. There's actual fitness standards, and it's objective tests that you are trying to make standards to ensure your well-being and your health after you're done being an athlete until you're 70 years old, Joseph. And this is we're talking about real long-term athletic development, not from a young child who just started a sport to the end of their sport. This is all the way through your lifetime.
So so that is useful for coach and for athlete, because a coach basically opens the book on its last pages where we have these tables. If you're 6 years old, this is what you need to be able to do. If you're 12 years old, this is what you need to be able to do. But the most stressful thing is that this 12-year-old says, okay, open. How old are you? And the coach says, okay, I'm 50. Okay, he opens up the table, and it says for 50 years old. This is how many push-ups, pull-ups you must be able to do. So this is Jed's concept. This supports Jed's concept of coaches working out with athletes on the basic fitness level and taking tests that are appropriate for their age. This is also useful for families because any grandparent and any parent together with their kids can go outside with this book, and they can do their push-ups, pull-ups, sit-ups, long long jumps, standing long jumps or running long jumps, and they can walk or run a mile, and it tells them what their results should be at their age. We have to stress that this is done after not just a review, but a review of reviews of global testing systems. And we published results of our research of global fitness tests. And we could not find anything that is more advanced and more integrated than this. Tests. These tests, they're called GTO, Ready for Labor and Defense. They've been developed since 1930s. And regularly they have been tested and modified with large groups of population, general population and athletes, and medical and sports scientists and pedagogues, specialists in pedagogical science and medical science, modified these tests and optimized them. There were at least 3 major reviews before World War II, and 2 after World War II. 2 reviews were done after World War II. So these tests have been very carefully developed for many decades. And of course, they need improvement. And I think we mentioned it in the second volume. We're going to suggest more advanced additions to their tests. But the basics are in the current book. We do have President's Test and President's Challenge in the United States. We have Eurofit in Europe. We can take elements of new innovations in this test and add to the GTO. That's absolutely necessary. For example, adding some spine, like Cobra, basic Cobra exercise from spine routine from yoga. Is a good addition that was added to the President's Test. It's good for everybody. It's good for those who are overweight, those whose health is not ideal. So these tests would benefit from I'd say people with additions for people with special needs and those whose health is below average. But for any person, still, these tests are very useful, and we're looking forward to creating a global system of testing, fitness testing and programming, that in the future, in the following 10-20 years, would be available to everyone around the world. We have. This is one of the first steps with our publication with updated GTO tests and some suggested addition from American President's tests and from European Eurofit tests is one of the first steps in creating a global system. But there are also sport-specific programs that must be integrated with the system, like the Jean Vic's yoga for athletes that is created to support fitness of athletes in a dozen in how many sports? I think in 10 or more sports, right, Jed?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yes, so basic exercises from these routines should be integrated into this test to make it more even more varied. This GTO test has more optional activities than any other systems, so it's quite large. There are a lot of options, but even more options could be added from Eastern health and fitness systems such as yoga, Tai Chi, Qigong, and other healthy fitness, health and fitness systems that are becoming part of Western culture, but are not yet. Maybe just yoga is now.
Mm-hmm.
So
And you know what, Peter, I want to add a little bit too on so the idea of, and we could get really far into the testing and recruitment and how that occurs in different parts of the world, and using the GTO. It's also a method of identifying talent, and then placing children in the right sports and things like that. But the idea that this is fringe with all those charts as far as how we have those objective numbers to be able to hit at certain times of life. I do want to talk a little bit about something that I also think is fringe, at least on the Western side, is the idea of certain training units that should be applied for health for athletes. For example, some of the programs that we have implemented at UNI that I've learned from Peter that were discovered and developed and evolved in the Deacle Spine Institute in Russia, where all athletes should do certain training units and do them as an addendum on top of their normal sport training or strength training. So I'm dealing with football athletes that, I mean, we're lifting heavy loads, sometimes 5 days a week. Sometimes we're doing double workouts, so double lifts. So they might get 8 lifting sessions in a week. And we incorporate some of these deloading workouts on the spine from the Deacle Spine Institute that allow these athletes to train harder and help prevent injuries. So they're decompression workouts, decompressing the spine, because so much of what we do as athletes is compression of the spine.
Jed, I think we will be putting the key routines in our second volume.
Yeah.
You're talking about.
We have to, yeah, but they're great. They're unbelievable. They're literally, I can say anecdotally, for certain athletes, they're life changing. There's multiple athletes that came in as freshmen in college. That football, as you know, it's a compression sport. So they're compressing the spine over and over again. It's like a car accident, in every single game. Well, I've had multiple athletes that have come in that had pre-existing spine injuries that had pain and difficulty doing back squats or cleans. They love the game of football. They're on a scholarship, but they were limited into their participation in the training because of their injuries. And the crazy thing is, Yosef, is some of these athletes, as a strength coach, you might think that maybe they're not mentally tough enough, that they're avoiding some of the difficult training. So they're having an excuse, because I've seen, thousands of excuses in my day as 25 years as a strength and conditioning coach. Difficult training, kids will go, oh, this hurts or this bothers me. Well, what I found when we started implementing some of these routines, as far as we call them recovery workouts, and they're great workouts, and on top of that. But when we started implementing these once a week, these injuries that these kids had pre-existing, when they came in the door, went away. And some of these athletes ended up getting near breaking records for their position on a back squat or a clean. So they were right up in the, near the best numbers anybody that ever played their position in our history were able to do, which is amazing to me. So then I thought to myself that they weren't lying. These guys, they wanted to do it. They're tough kids, but they had real injuries that they went away over time, and they were able to integrate into our normal training and spine loading, heavy back squats, heavy cleans, heavy snatches, heavy pulls, heavy deadlifts, and have no trouble.
So this is like a one hour session. This integrates yoga, aerobic, sport-specific exercises from different countries and ancient, especially ancient systems of Eastern fitness
physical culture, Eastern physical culture.
Yeah, but we focused on putting together exercises that are strengthening your joints, all your joint tissues in your body. They strengthen it while stretching it. So you stretch it and then you strengthen it at the same time. And we're trying to build compound exercises so that you do it in the most efficient way. We created a sequence. Sequence is very critical. This is another fringe in the West that is coming to every participant. Sequence, how to put exercises in order so that you are rotating or integrating constantly, stretching with strengthening. Okay?
And warming up certain areas of the body to allow for more decompression, to release the spine in certain periods as it's sequential, heating up properly, and then allowing the spine to elongate, stretch, and strengthen. Yeah, you can feel it as you go through the step by step.
So what we created with Jet, we created a routine that's with your own body, mostly laying on the floor. Then we created a routine that is for the gym machines, also stretching, a lot of pulling and stretching, and while it's stretching, it's strengthening. And then we created an equivalent for TRX ropes and an almost identical equivalent for rubber bands and for using a partner. So we have a spectrum of modes going through a routine that is full body workout, all focused on strengthening while stretching and compounding it. So you're doing it in the most condensed period of time. So this is important because for long-term as they compete, and this must become their lifelong routine. So when they retire, they continue using these key exercises that keep them healthy. Most important, keep their spine healthy, because spine is the most damaged, the most painful in terms of number. More than half of the population, general population, have back pain. So spine causes pain in more than half of average overall population. But within those who compete seriously, for serious athletes, it could be close to 80% in certain sports because of the compression, because of the overload of the spine. So this is the most important area for long-term athlete development, where you strengthen and stretch and keep stimulated the spine, then different joints. So this is what we offer to the readers, is the most advanced collection of exercises for this hopefully in optimal sequence that you can use for life after you retire.
Yeah, and I want to expound on that a little bit, Peter. So I think it's important to understand that a lot of things that we do to develop these athletes, you wouldn't necessarily do outside of the realm of developing an athlete. Some of the training is very, very intense, and it prepares their body for, again, football is it's a very violent sport. So you have to prepare the body to be able to handle those stresses that they're going to have within the game. And these athletes become very, very toughened, and we have to go through a series of steps to train them to be able to withstand those type of impacts. Now, the general population doesn't necessarily need to train in those ways, but in order to help us train these athletes in those ways, by adding on these addendums of these training units, we're able to get much, much more out of the athlete. Now, once they're done playing the sport, these are therapeutic workouts. And these workouts are designed to continue well after you're done playing. So you implement them to help you get the athlete through the training, help keep them safe, help them reach different levels in their training, and then beyond their training, they should just keep doing these. Probably they need to stop doing certain things that are not necessary anymore when they're done training to be a football player. There's no need to do certain types of training, but this is recommended. And the funny thing is certain things that we've done to develop either tactical athletes in the U.S., as far as in the military, or like football athletes that are in high compressive games and sports, contact sports, have gravitated into the fitness industry, some of those training methodologies that maybe aren't the best thing for the general population to use. But these right here are, like Peter's saying, these will benefit anyone. And that's why, the book is titled Fringe Methodologies in High Performance and Health, because certain things are used for high performance, certain things are used for health, and there's certain things that should be integrated. And the nice thing about these training units that Peter's referring to that we've implemented, they're coming out of world-class institutes like the Deacle Spine Institute, where Peter has gotten access to some of the top minds in this field, and so they've used them in the Russian sport developmental system, and we're probably the first university, I would imagine, in the United States that's implemented those type of training units and concepts with our athletes. I mean, am I right, Peter?
Yeah, I haven't seen an integrated system like this being in place, and I think we will continue with the second volume of the book. We will continue to add to this so that this can be described in a more concise, simple way, so that everybody can use it. Every athletic program and every participant can use it.
It's interesting, that you talk about this. I think that as a lifelong plan, because I know that back in the beginning, the Soviets were looking at it as trying to develop a more resilient society in general. Became part of the propaganda, and they knew that a physically healthier society was going to make them stronger as a nation in many different ways. More productive. It also kind of helped to promote some of the political ideas. So they looked at it from that really long point of view, from child all the way to the elderly. And the United States kind of had looked at that, I think, in the 60s a little bit with when Kennedy was in office, and then it just kind of went away. And then as time progressed, it really became I don't know what you say. It really kind of disappeared, I guess, because America had become pretty unfit in general, and kind of had lost our way. So you either had athletes or people who were totally sedentary and not doing anything. And as you said, I worked in the field of treating back problems, disorders, about 15 years ago, and I was amazed at the number of back problems that there are, and to really high degrees of severity and that are disabling. and a lot of them can be prevented. Like from what you're talking about, a lot of them can be prevented from just strengthening the musculature around the low back. Some of the movements, like with yoga, tai chi, can also be valuable, and a couple other methods there can be valuable. So it's funny that it's fringe. It shouldn't be fringe. It should be standard operating procedure,
Yeah.
right? I mean, it really shouldn't be a fringe idea in the United States. But the reality is, it is a fringe idea for sure. On the junior side, or on the with the kids and stuff and young athletes, I think one of the things that really stands out is that in the United States, we play the sport a lot. So we'll have the kid, even at 7, play the sport a lot as the means to getting better. But the thing that the Soviets did, and I think some other countries, the GDR and some other places did really well, was they developed the athlete as a whole. Like you said, there was strength development, there was endurance, because at the younger ages, you really like to develop that aerobic capacity at a young age. You'd like to be able to develop skills, not sports specific ideas, but general skills like running, throwing, kicking, things of this nature. And all the while developing the athlete's strength and all the other different qualities, while maybe playing the sport a little bit, but not playing it nearly as much as what we do. Peter, could you talk about that real quickly, like how the Soviets would look at that as far as the participation in the actual sport? How much, how did they divide that up?
The long-term athletic development model and American development model that anybody can now look at by going to websites of national governing bodies. They describe that at this early age, very important thing is the variety of sports and just open and fun play. It's fun. It's time to have fun, not to become too serious about it and burn out. But at the same time, it's critical to develop this endurance, strength, flexibility, and coordination. So it's not. I think it's not quite true to say, okay, serious training is always gonna make your kids deprive them from fun. But
Right.
I think it's more important to realize that all of this is critical. Play and fun is critical, but the medically driven development of age appropriate endurance, strength, flexibility, and coordination must be integrated into this fun, and that's to your point of importance of high level of pedagogical skills of coaches. It's only a coach who is very well educated and experienced can do it well, can integrate age appropriate running, jumping, a bit of push-ups, a bit of pull-ups here and there, but overall make sure that at 6 years, 7 years, and 8 years of age, your children, as they play and as they try maximum number of sports at this age, very important, they still develop all the important components of their fitness. And again, these tests that are at the end of the books, they give you the requirements for that, showing what you should not do. You should not go beyond 5 pull-ups for a 7-year-old, for example, and other criteria. in Eastern Europe, these criteria were quite strict, and you are not. You are not allowed, or you are not strongly not recommended to allow your children to lift weights, wrestle, and do other compressing exercises before the age of 13, or sometimes earlier. You wouldn't you should not start loading the spine and doing so, but still it's done. Very strict rules that have been in place, have been compensated by kind of let's put it this way, a relaxed approach to compliance to these rules. But these guidelines I think are very important, as now we're becoming more and more aware of this parents push. Parents push to start performing, to start competing too early, and because the scholarships, because of the financial material awards are so vivid, and more and more, I think more and more accepted in Western societies. Parents become less and less responsible, and they push their kids over the board, and national governing bodies organize competitions for kids that are too young, competing at 6 years old, 7 years of age, in countries like Norway is not allowed. Clubs would lose their permission to operate if they organize stressful competitions for kids of this age. But in many other countries, it is okay to push your kids to the limit at early age. So while these guidelines mentioned in our book, we're still searching for best practices in this long-term athlete development, particularly at this early age. And I think countries like Scandinavian countries manage it very well. Why Norway is so successful on the top, and why it is number one nation by total medal count in Winter Olympics. And they beat Canada and the United States and Russia. Amazing. Small country is performing so better than countries with huge populations and much greater resources. When one reason is that they manage their early athlete development very carefully, and they really nurture their children from the very beginning. They do follow these guidelines that we have on very often we have them on paper, and we have them published. Long-term athlete development guidelines, but we still do push kids to, might not give them full spectrum of sports to try before we help them to specialize in a discipline that we think is the most promising. Mm-hmm. But there is more and more research showing that if you're successful at age of 10, 12, and even 13, 14 years old, it does not mean that you will be successful at the age of 20. There is more research, and yes. So it's very important to step back from this and look at Eastern European guidelines for long-term athlete development. Look at Scandinavian and Northern European guidelines and practices now, and revisit and constantly review them and try to advance.
Mm-hmm. And I think that that is important, and it's nice that in our book, Peter, that you have those charts that are translated into English, because it is some general guidelines as far as fitness and strength standards that you should be at through your development as an athlete, through your life, long-term athletic development. But then that multilateral approach, we've known that for a long time, that it develops the athlete much better. You look at even small schools in the United States. I'll give you one example. A good friend of mine, Bryce Pop, he is a famous American football player. He's one of our coaches here at UNI. He was the defensive MVP, most valuable player in the NFL. Phenomenal American football player. But he grew up in a small town, and because he was in a small town, there was no specialization in his youth. He played all sports that were available because there wasn't enough kids. So it was funny, him and I were having a conversation about long-term athletic development and his development as an athlete. He goes, I never even heard of such a thing, but there was no specialization because it was so small. It's like, you need to play basketball, you need to run track, you need to play baseball because we need you. You need to be playing football. Every single sport and then when you're playing football, you need to play both sides. You need to play everywhere because there wasn't enough kids. So he never heard of long-term athletic development. And then when he came to the university, he was behind. He got his scholarship. He comes to play here at UNI, and he was a little behind at the beginning because he didn't specialize. But then he just rapidly evolved quickly to the point where he gets drafted in the NFL as one of the premier college players. And it's because, as I discussed with him, he goes, now I realize how important my upbringing was, where I had the opportunity to play everything, and I was constantly playing multiple sports. That's just one anecdote.
Yeah, and there are quite a lot of examples like this, where athletes have been developed properly like this by luck, just because they live close to YMCA, or you live close to a school that has many sports offered, and then you play. This is what should be developed across the country, in every region, ideally in every suburb. There should be conditions for these multi-sport opportunities for everybody. That's in our ideal future world. This is what we should strive for. And if we look into the future, this is what governments and sport organizations, national governing bodies, and local sport organizations, local clubs should partner to develop. And we, as participants, as coaches, and as parents, we should realize one important thing, that we are using this Eastern European concepts as the most advanced, most specific, most sophisticated skills. And we look at them as tools for selecting athletes, and we're looking for answers in these practices that would help us to identify the most optimal sport for our child or our participant, and the most optimal specialization, right? Based on the tests. We know that there are physiological tests. Now there are genetic tests that help you identify optimal sport in which you're going to be successful, and optimal position. Yes, in the Soviet Union, in Eastern Europe, you would be taken through anthropometry testing, and later on you would be it would be biopsy test of your muscles to see whether you're going to be, you know, on the most basic level, you know, your muscle is either showing as short or long potential. So short means that you're going to be strong and fast. Long means you're going to be more, you know, enduring and aerobically able athlete. These are examples of different tests. Yes, tests have been used. Tests are used by Chinese now extensively. We discussed it in our book. But the most important thing for coaches that coach youth is to realize that this testing has been multi-year testing, not one-off test, but tests that are physiological and psychological, that are integrated into many years of developing an athlete.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you're filtering, you're culling your talent through many years of not only testing but expert observation. And this expert observation must be done by experienced coaches. And these coaches, and they must not dismiss. And this is what's been happening in the Soviet Union, and that's what happened with me. No one told me drop out. I was told many times, this is not your optimal sport. You have to move to the discipline where you're going to be more successful and healthier for life. This concept is critically important for both developing high performance athletes, but also for developing healthier populations, where our genetic tests, physiological tests, various blood tests, and psychological tests help us identify activities where we're going to be not just successful as athletes, but we're going to be healthy for life.
Mm-hmm. I want to add a little bit there and kind of go back in the conversation a little bit too. There's an important component even at the peak of the pyramid when you're an elite athlete that a lot of times is forgotten. The fact that it shouldn't all be just specificity training. We have a multilateral approach with young athletes at the beginning, at the base, as we develop them over time. But even at the top, we need to make sure that they're doing things outside of that sport to develop coordination, you know, their rhythm, their timing, things that still develop them as an athlete. For example, in Beijing at the Olympic Training Center, when I was watching their weightlifters that were preparing for the 2008 games, every single day they would have these athletes add training units of table tennis, ping pong. And so these are world-class weightlifters that you wouldn't think that there's any hand-eye coordination or timing, but there is. It's a very quick movement, the sport of weightlifting, in a millisecond, and it's a strength and power sport. Here they're having these athletes, part of their training is they are playing ping pong, working on rhythm, timing, coordination as a cool down, and it was part of their regular training. These ideas, I can go back in time to the 1960s in the United States. But when I first started working for the Minnesota Vikings, in the old training center that they had, doesn't exist anymore, called Winter Park, their old facilities were built in 1968. When I went in there, next to the strength and conditioning center, they had these rooms that were not being used anymore. And the old athletic trainer came to me, and he was there from the onset of the Vikings in 1968. And he goes, "Hey, let me show you something." And he goes to these rooms and he says, what are these? And opens them up, filled with boxes of storage. And I said, "Storage?" And he goes, "No." He goes, "We've gone away from the simple concepts we used to know in the United States and apply." He goes, "These are racquetball courts, general physical training for elite athletes outside of the sport of football. We had these athletes back in the 1960s incorporate racquetball training just for coordination, timing, reflexes, agility outside of football." And he goes, "We don't do this anymore in America. For everything is so specific. It's all sports specific at the most elite levels, and we don't incorporate a multilateral approach, which we know that we should." So when I was working with the NHL players, when I was with the Minnesota Wild, I would incorporate badminton 1 day a week, just working on some reflexes, rhythm, timing, coordination outside. And obviously, if you know anything about badminton, that birdie, the shuttlecock, is the fastest implement in sport. It goes faster than a baseball pitch, goes faster than a hockey slap shot, but very, very fast with world-class shuttlecocks when you get the Olympic caliber ones. And these guys are developing great skills. Part of their training outside of the strength training, speed work, agility work, and so forth. But you need to think about implementing, even at the top of the pyramid, they still need to develop as an athlete, train their minds, train their bodies in different ways. And we know that from research that was done in the Soviet Union years ago. But again, it's something that isn't practiced all the time.
Guys, I appreciate all the information here, kind of drawing that picture. I think that the takeaway for everybody is that, when you're looking at developing an athlete, it's a process over a protracted period of time, if not a lifetime. And so when you begin to develop an athlete, I think the things that are different in the U.S. that probably, this would make it fringe in the United States, is a lot of people look at things in the United States as a program for this amount of weeks or months or whatever, and not looking at it as trying to get gradual improvement over the length of the athlete's career. If he's 10, 12 years old, the Soviets would look at it and say, well, where should he be at when he's 25? Looking at it a decade later or even further out. And we don't really do that. And I think one of the points that you made earlier, Peter, is really critical for the American audience to hear, is that just because a kid at 13 is really good is no indicator of where he's going to be at as an adult. So you have to be looking at that long-term strategy, not presuming that he's going to be excellent later on, because of the development maturation paces are vastly different. And each kid, still needs to master the physical components, the physical abilities and attributes of fitness overall, and then diving into the sport, more fully. So I think that the critical components is to see that in the long term, the picture. It's a marathon. It's not a short thing, and playing more is not an indication of mastering the sport. It's more of the overall development. It's not playing more at the younger ages or specializing. And specialization, I think the biggest problem with it is that it's not so much that it's specialized, is that it's over volumized. There's too much time spent on it, too many games played, or too many practices specific on the sport. And this is where the athlete might get injured, burnt out, or just, start to see an impediment to their progress overall, in the absence, especially of the physical fitness development that should be going on during that phase. And it should be appropriate. I work as a consultant at a school, and we're using that in the whole district, and looking at it when I look at a kid in the 5th grade, I'm saying, well, where does he want to be when he's in 12th grade, when he leaves here? Where, would he like to be able to get a scholarship in a particular sport? Can we develop him up to the level where he could be scholarship eligible in multiple sports, because he has that base of athleticism that will translate, onto multiple sports if he so desires, right? It gives him a lot of alternatives and choices, or young ladies. So I appreciate you guys filling in on this. This has been really good talk on this subject matter. We're going to take it further, obviously. We want to dive into all the other particulars of the physical training and the long-term athletic development, but I appreciate you guys' time today, though. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
It was a pleasure.
Thanks, Joseph. Yep. Talk to you guys later.
Thank you.
Thanks.